sky and all the living things which inhabit them were created long ago. The universe began when the Creator breathed light upon the darkness, when the shifting void began to take shape within this light, and the shadows which drifted began to move in direction. Delivered the land upon the shore. Finally, the people rose from the dark caverns of the inner world and came onto the land. The universe was complete. I'm Cliff Robertson. The first people to come upon this land that we call North America were the American Indians. To them, this land was and is sacred. Sacred ground is the story of the North American Indians' relationship to this land.
It is the knowledge of my people that we come from the earth. We are on this land as part of the Creator's great vision, that all His living things are to exist in harmony. The tree, the bird, the child, the sun, all have their rightful place upon this ground. To us, this land cannot be bought or sold. It belongs to all who inhabit it. Our life is a cycle. We are born of the earth, and in death return to the earth, joining our ancestors in the spirit world. There are many places across the land that, to my people, are special. At these sacred grounds, the Indian finds, through communication with the ancestors, visions, and meditation, the meaning of his life.
During this hour, we will visit places known, respected, and revered by the American Indian. He did not compare or measure the beauty of one place against the other. To him, what was and is distinctive about these places is that they are sacred. Before the Western man saw this continent, it was a great wild garden filled with trees, grasses, and water. It was inhabited by creatures which leaped and darted among these growing things. Among these inhabitants was the Indian. Although he was as fleet of foot as some, he could not fly like the bird, nor did he have the strength of the greatest of mammals. But he was one among them. His difference was his intellect. He wondered at things which he saw and could not explain. The Indian's ancestors first told the story of the creation, and so it had come to him. The appearance of the universe in which he lives confirms his ancestors' stories. There is an order within the universe. All things behave in relationship to all other things. The Indian himself is but a part of this order. Within this order, the Indian holds the enormous memory of the creation of the cosmos. Within this memory are the images and symbols of the universe which surrounds him. The history of this ground, the soil, the fields, the forests, mountains, and rivers. The ground that is now known to us as the United States has become known to us within the unhappy conflict of two different cultures, ours and that of the American Indian. The older of these two cultures, the Indians, began within the ground itself. Every moment of their ancient experience is related to the ground. Our culture began long ago in Europe, but only as recently as 1492 did we begin our history on this ground. Attempting to share the Indians' ground in a way which we understood so differently created a conflict which has never been resolved. Christopher Columbus, in a letter written in 1493, gave his impression of the Native Americans.
As soon as they see that they are safe and have laid aside all fear, they are very simple and honest, and exceedingly liberal with all they have. They exhibit great love toward others in preference to themselves.
In May of 1607, at what is now Jamestown, Virginia, 105 people, seeking religious and personal freedom, established the first English colony and immediately sought help from the Indians. 2 years later, Powhatan, the father of Pocahontas and the man responsible for the survival of the colony, spoke with great innocence and wonderment to a thankless John Smith.
Why should you take by force from us that which you have by love? Why should you destroy us who have provided you with food?
The Great Migration from Europe continued. The differences between the two cultures became increasingly marked. In 1786, Thomas Jefferson declared,
"It may be regarded as certain that not a foot of land will be taken from the Indian without his consent."
Behind the reassuring words, the Indian began to see what was meant as opposed to what was said. Inspired by the philosophy of manifest destiny, and urged on by the peculiarly limited view of Christianity, the white man marched across the lands of the Indian. In his message to Congress in 1867, President Andrew Johnson, Abraham Lincoln's successor, declared,
"If the savage resists, civilization with the 10 Commandments in one hand and the sword in the other demands his immediate extermination."
Commence firing at will! Take no prisoners!
An entire culture was virtually eliminated in less than 300 years. Those who remain were confined to reservations on strange ground, distant from their ancestral homes. But the white man did not succeed in destroying the Indians' instinctual relationship to the ground. The Indian's relationship to the ground endures. He has been removed from this ground, but it remains sacred to him. It remains a part of him, and so his existence returns to it for sustenance and guidance forever.
Our religion is the tradition of our ancestors, the dreams of our old men. To us, the ashes of our ancestors are sacred, and their resting place is hallowed ground. Every part of the soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley has been hallowed by some happy or sad event in days gone past.
The great Chief Seattle spoke those words. You and I celebrate our past, but maybe we celebrate our past without enough awareness of the ground upon which our history has been created. The ground whose own history makes our brief history look microscopic in comparison. The American Indian found his sacred grounds instinctively. Within this land, he found the symbols for the meaning of his life. And he succeeded in answering his questions about himself far better, it seems, than we have done for ourselves. As we visit these places, it will become evident to us what the American Indian knew of his land, and what he knew can be recognized by us. The profound relationship of the American Indian with the land began with his origin. The ground was the womb which held him. The earth, his mother. But the emergence from the earth was only the start of a long journey for the Indian. There was yet the journey which takes him across the land, the journey which leads him through time. For the Pueblo Indian, his creation and the journey, the obstacles he overcame and the lessons he learned, make his history. They are the story of his existence. The Pueblo journey is not measured in decades and centuries. Their journey is a journey of the spirit, as much as it is the migration of a people. While they do not know when the journey began, nor if it has yet ended, they do know that it started far north of here, above the Great Plains. The Pueblo recalls in detail all the features of each place along the journey which brought him here. They point to these places to prove that the journey did take place. To the north, in the canyons, cliffs, and mesa tops of the Four Corners area of the Southwest, we can recognize the evidence that the Pueblo people's journey did begin within the earth. Their earliest habitations were circular pit houses, laboriously burrowed by hand into the earth. Each day as the Indian emerged from the protective womb of the pit house, he entered into the face of the rising sun. Just as he originally climbed from the dark bowels of the earth toward the sun, so he is reborn each new day. Soon the growing population forced an expansion of the single-unit pit house into elaborate multi-level cliff house dwellings. However, the pit house remained in the form of a subterranean ceremonial chamber called a kiva. As the tribe grew, they moved southward, and the world which surrounded them changed. Instinctively, the Pueblo people adapted to this new ground. They shaped and clustered house blocks in the sandy stone of this new land. The openings of these houses still faced the beneficent sun. They incorporated the kiva into the house blocks, so that the memory of their great journey and their origin would always be with them. Here in these kivas, the leaders could commune between the world of the living and the spirit world beyond. Eventually, the practical world's necessities crowded the kiva out into the open. There it continued as an indelible reminder of where the Pueblo journey of existence began. This grand kiva, near cities centuries old in the long-abandoned Largo Canyon on the high desert of New Mexico, exemplifies a continuing evolution of a people. Here, within these sunken walls, people from several surrounding communities could come and satisfy their spiritual needs. Even though the kiva's shape and location within the physical world has changed, the feelings it engenders have not. From its beginnings on the side of a cliff far to the north in a small burrowed pit house, the kiva evolved into the focal point for the spiritual needs of the Pueblo people. Here, within the walls of this great kiva, the Pueblo people can still feel a part of their journey and be content that their migration as a people does, in fact, have a final destination. Many of the Indian sacred grounds are located at places which rise above the rest of his land. These high places put him closer to the spirits and strengthen his opportunity to appeal to the gods. The Indian's need to communicate with his creator and the spirits above send him to those places which reach up from the earth into the sky. At these elevations, he is exhilarated by the sight of his physical world below and by the presence of the spirit world around him. Highest of the sacred high places are the volcanic peaks which rise above the clouds in the Pacific Northwest. Here, no matter how far the Indian travels, the great mountain watches him. He knows that the benefits he receives and the calamities which befall him originate within the spirit of the great mountain. These mountains are not climbed by the Indian seeking communication with the spirits. These mountains are the spirits. It is said that these great spirit mountains once fought among themselves for power. The collapse of their volcanic summits is explained by the battles between the spirits in which the conqueror broke off the heads of the other mountains so that the sun would alight upon his head earliest each dawn. All men are stirred by the sight of high places. The Indian knows these heights for the spirits which can be reached from them, or for the spirits which they are. He knows these high places will always be in his horizon, because they are eternal. The Yuma, Pima, and Maricopa tribes of the Southwest believe that everything of importance in life, both now and in later worlds, was revealed in dreams. The culture of these tribes was based entirely upon the ability to dream, the knowledge of how to induce dreaming, and the interpretation of dreams. The origin of these tribes is Avikome, a brooding mountain in the Mojave Desert. The world of these tribes is bordered by Avikome on the west and 1,000 miles to the east encompassed by the crescent-shaped basin formed by the Superstition Mountains, the Gila River, and the vertebrae-like Estrella Mountains. This is the Valley of the Sun. The contrasts of this land are stark and foreboding. Superstition and mystery haunt this ground. Here the earth exudes a spiritual and menacing brooding. The ground itself induces dreams. Among the tribes of the Pima, Maricopa, and the Yuma, women were many times given the greatest power to dream, and from their dreams receive the knowledge, the guidance to lead their tribe. At puberty, a young girl is called by the ancestral spirits and transported in astral projection of dreams to a sacred cave. Her physical and spiritual dream journey will take her through the Valley of the Sun, over the Estrellas where the ashes of the ancestors are buried, to the top of the western face of the Superstitions, and among the slender columns that are the petrified bodies of her ancestral people. Here, this chosen girl will be given the power to interpret her dreams and those of her tribe, enabling her to advise and lead her people. The tall spires of the Superstitions are sacred ground, imbued with the spirits of her forefathers, and they stand in silent vigil, ever watchful over the people. When tribes like the Kiowa migrated eastward, descending out of their original mountains, They came down onto the great plains of Wyoming, and here on the shore of these plains, as their eyes scanned the horizon, they saw in the distance a giant stone tower rising alone and against the vast sky. A quiet invaded the hearts of the immigrants. The sight of this awesome shape stirred images of the unknown and the supernatural in their minds. Because its presence was unnatural within the calm expanse of the prairie, they recognized it as a bad spirit's tower. The Kiowa knew that they must find an explanation for this tower. For if they did not, they, like this unnatural shape, would remain forever alien to the plains. Throughout human history, man has explained the unknown to himself by creating legend. For the Greeks, hierarchies of gods wooed and fought one another for the control of man. For the early Christians, the instincts which forced man's behavior took the form of angels or demons. For the Indian, the spirits which guide him are within the trees, the rivers, within the ground which surrounds him. For all men, the divine was gifted with miracles. This tower, rising so unexpectedly from the plains, inspired this Kiowa legend. 8 children were at play, 7 sisters and their brother. Suddenly the boy was struck dumb. He trembled and began to run upon his hands and feet. His fingers became claws, his body covered with fur. There was a bear where the boy had been. The sisters were terrified. They ran, but the bear chased after them. They came to the stump of a great tree, and the tree spoke to them. It urged them to climb upon it, and as they did so, it began to rise into the air. The bear came to kill them, but they were just beyond its reach. It reared against the tree and scored the bark with its claws. The 7 sisters were borne safely into the sky. They became the stars of the Big Dipper. From that moment, and so long as this legend lives, the Kiowas have kinsmen in the night sky. These 7 stars, as constant each night as the sun is each dawn, assures the Indian that the spirits above continue to guide him. Having explained the ominous tower to themselves, they were free to cross into the plains where they, like the tower, became masters of the great spaces that surround them. The Indian found his sacred ground instinctively. Where he built structures upon this ground in response to its sacredness, and where these structures remain, we can identify his sacred ground without the aid of legend or myth. The most familiar of all his responses, which are still evident to us, are earthen mounds.
Yo hey hey. Yo hey.
These mounds, which took painstaking labor, which required the lifting and shaping of tons of earth, which sometimes took years to complete, were built out of the compelling need of the Indian to honor and communicate with the Great Spirit.
Yo hey hey. Yo hey hey.
The sun was the principal object of veneration for the Indian mound builders. There was nothing which was more powerful than this heavenly body. The chief of the mound cities was brother of the sun. Upon the highest of the mounds, there rose a temple from which the chief conversed with his brother, the sun. Facing east, the chief awaited each day with a song. When the sun stood on the horizon, the chief would wave his arm east to west, directing the sun on his journey for the day. Greatest of all the ancient mound cities was Cahokia, a city of 30,000, as elaborate as an Aztec kingdom. It existed at the place where the Mississippi and the Missouri converged. Between 900 AD and 1300 AD, this city prospered and grew under the beneficence of the sun. These mounds are all that remain of large mound cities which were once inhabited by thousands of people. By 1500 AD, Cahokia had disappeared, while the survivors of a dead city migrated to another ground. Those who were deceased migrated into the realm of the ancestors. Death was the conclusion of one cycle of the Indian's existence. It was essential to the Indian that he bury the dead appropriately, so that the dead might make the journey from this existence to the next. The dead were buried with their few but important possessions. And sometimes faithful wives followed their husbands into death. While the spirit of the dead ascended to join the ancestors, the bones remain below within the sacred ground. The blood of the ancestors returns to the earth, so that it may nourish those yet to be born. Here in these shallow quarries of southwestern Minnesota, the color of the soft rock reveals vividly the ancestors' blood. These rocks belong to all Indians, for it is the blood of all his ancestry. Here there is no contest among the tribes, although they may be enemies, for the sacredness of this place gives it a moral neutrality. These layered rocks, carefully pried loose, provide the Indian with the material with which he can bring together the harmonious influence of the ancestors with his negotiations in the present world. Pipestone is one of the most sacred of all Indian places on the North American continent. Literally, every peace pipe made is from this red sacred clay. Tribes as distant as the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific coast migrated to this place to gather clay for their peace pipes. Consequently, every peace pipe ever smoked between the Indian and with white men during the struggle for this continent originated from this little quarry known as Pipestone. 10 bears, black kettle, crazy horse, red cloud, and high-back wolf brought their lips to these pipes. The smoke rose to the spirits as they asked for peace. They asked for fairness. They asked to be left alone, left to ancient traditions. The pipes remain the symbols of their way of life. The blood of the ancestors cupped within its bowl, the memories and hopes of the Indian for peace. The Indian's urge to live harmoniously with his fellow man was as strong as his need to live within nature. as all civilized men aspire toward peace, the Indian pursued this ideal. For many years, the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, and the Oneida had fought among themselves over the hunting grounds surrounding the Finger Lakes of central New York. When these tribes agreed to never again fight one another, they met here on the shore of Lake Onondaga. Beside this lake stands a great white pine, the symbol of the Indians' most successful effort at lasting peace. Here the tribes buried their warring weapons in a great cavity, and from this grave grew a white pine tree. Each of the follicles of this tree holds 5 needles, symbolic of the 5 tribes of this region who created among themselves the oldest and to date the most successful of all peaceful alliances in North American history. These tribes govern themselves under one roof, a council house built of elm bark, which the white pioneers copied when they built their log cabins. Beneath the roof of this structure, known as Longhouse, the guidance of the Great Spirit and the wisdom of the ancestors mingle with the smoke from the leaders' pipes. Nearby, there is a place where the Indian may retreat to prepare himself for the councils at Longhouse. This water, which drops suddenly to the dense forest, speaks to the Indian with the voices of the spirits, its advice unceasing as it pours from the rocks and drops its sound. The tree, the Longhouse, and this water create a ground which is sacred. Upon this ground, the Indian can meet with himself and find guidance for the maintenance of his nation. There's a Hopi legend that once long ago all the tribes were one. They came first upon the land and found but one inhabitant, the Creator. They knew they must first ask him for permission to settle. The Creator, being wise, agreed, but with many instructions and prophecies. He instructed that as the Indian migrated across the land, they were to record their history upon the rocks, because, as a Creator prophesied, the Indian would one day be conquered by another race. In time, that conquering race would vanish, and the Indian writings would remain the voice of the past, testimonial that this land was for the Indian, but had only one rightful owner, the Creator. As the tribes divided and migrated across the land, the rock writing sites took their sacred place in the evolving culture. One such place exists at Nuva Hunt, in the scorching southwestern desert of Nevada. The red sandstone outcropping at the base, covered with ancient rock writings, acts as a giant tongue for this mute, sacred mountain. Pictorial accounts of important human events are recorded here, preserving the past and awaiting the future on this sacred ground. Like all communication systems, rock writing was born of necessity. It portrays its message, ideas, and feelings through picture and symbol, patterned and influenced by the sign language common to most tribes. Rock writing served many functions, and its usage became important to daily survival. In sign language, fingers of both hands spreading in a sinuous downward movement is the sign language symbol for snow. At the base of Nuva Hunt, we find the rock writing symbol for snow. Its similarity to sign language is obvious. It was then an easy matter to incorporate the symbol for snow with this symbol, which means sacred, Literally translated, this rock writing symbol says to go around both sides and not within. We then have an easily understood pictorial phrase that simply says, a sacred place where it snows. The rock writer often used the existing features and positions of the rocks in his message. A crack could indicate a river or canyon. A hump on the surface might be a high place. Nearby, a traumatic event is recorded. It tells of a great drought. Illustrated by the polywog, the Hopi symbol for abundant water, and placed next to the symbol for diminish as well as a smaller polywog, the reader interprets the writing as abundant water went away. In what is now Washington County, Utah, another rock writing sacred ground tells an awesome Indian experience that was recorded on this large panel. It is the pictorial record of the first contact with the white man by a particular tribe of Hopi descendants. It was the Escalante expedition. It was the year of independence for the American colonists. It was 1776. The detail involved in this panel reflects the Indians' apprehension and anxiety that resulted from this encounter. Although it translates as a peaceful initial meeting and adheres to the Spanish diary of the same incident, the Indian viewpoint has a sense of anticipation and wonderment. Leave your history on the rocks, for another race will conquer you, but will someday vanish, and this land will again be yours and have but one rightful owner. For according to many of the old men, all that has happened was prophesied. But for the Indian, the prophecies are not yet fulfilled. The rocks have yet to speak all that they know, and have yet to fulfill their sacred destiny. On the high plateau of Arizona, there is a canyon into whose crevices are drawn the elements of the Navajo universe. The place is the center of the Navajo's existence, where wisdom and serenity reside with the spirits of the ancient ones. For the North American Indian, the center of the universe is the place where he can exist in contentment, responsible to himself and to the world around him. For the Navajo, this place is Canyon de Chelly. The architecture of this canyon, the steep walls, the shaded tunnels, the sharp pinnacles, are the Navajo's physical world. The things which move through this architecture, the wind which grazes the cliffs, the light which invades the tunnels, the shadows which move around the pinnacles, are the spirits of the ancestors who reside there. Long ago, they carved their cities beneath great overhangs, which roofed them against weather, shadowed them from enemies. The Navajo, a wandering people, came into Canyon de Chelly after the original people had left their cities to the wind. They found evidence of a civilization left vacant, awaiting their arrival. They had inherited a whole and complex former world. They had come among the Anasazi, the ancient ones, and there they would remain. The spirit of the spider grandmother, who in Navajo legend wove the web which enabled the chosen ones to climb up from the worlds beneath to this world, stands sentinel at the head of the canyon. She remains indestructible. The wind encircles and moves on through the caves where the other ancients reside. Canyon de Chelly is the center of the Navajo's universe because it is here where his ancestral history joins with his physical world. Perhaps here at Canyon de Chelly, we find the strongest example at present of the continuing relationship between the Indian and his sacred ground. Here, he understands his place among all his people and his relationship to his universe. In time, perhaps as their creator prophesied, all the Indian people will return to their lands and will begin their lives anew. The hard-running winds of the plateau invest these canyons with the oldest, most particular sounds of the earth and sky. One imagines that the voices of the ancient ones and those of the present will carry here forever. Noawas is the place where the Cheyenne go to renew their power, which enables them to survive as a people. To the Cheyenne, this enormous butte which rises out of the green and yellow prairie of southwestern South Dakota is Noawas, the mountain where the people are taught. It is here that they receive their power of the hunt, which gives them their sustenance and their power to defend themselves against hardship. He had to visit sacred ground. Only there could he communicate with the world above, which had given his ancestors visions in the past and which held them for his future. For the Cheyenne, as other Indians, visions advised and guided them. They helped them order their life, reconcile misfortune, and predicted the ways they should follow. But the great visions did not come to the Indian readily. He had to journey to find them. He had to follow the steps of an ordeal before the great visions came to him. The Cheyenne come to Noawas because it was here that their legendary hero, Sweet Medicine, received the sacred arrows which gave the Cheyenne their powers. Each year, following in the steps of Sweet Medicine, chosen Cheyenne journey across the prairie to this butte. A young brave's ordeal is shared by his father and his grandfather. Together, the men will ascend the butte, carrying with them the sacred buffalo head and the sacred buffalo robe. These two will help draw the vision. The buffalo head and the robe are symbolic of the vision they seek. The physical journey, the climb, is but a part of the ordeal. The men must prepare themselves to receive the vision. They must also satisfy rituals to become one with their surroundings. They must join the wind, the sky, and the rocks, which hold the sacredness of Noawas. Once these labors have begun, they will fast until the vision comes to them. They see suspended in the heavens a great golden plain, the color of the sun. In the center of the plain roam a great herd of black buffalo. Encircling the buffalo are the people, all the Cheyenne who have ever lived and died, and all those yet to be born. It is the vision the Cheyenne have sought. It tells them that their land is bountiful and that they are protected from all their enemies. Their ancestors and their children join them forever. they endure. Visions are sought by the Indian throughout his life. They are the means by which he receives his spiritual direction. Visions reveal to him the wisdom of the past, the potential of the future. They tell him what he must do. Visions are the teacher. The people are taught. We have been but momentary visitors to these places where the Indian dwells. Places where not only his lifetime is spent, but where his entire history, all of his past and all of his future, dwell. Perhaps we've been guided toward a realization that the Indian and the ground are the same. He is born of the earth and he returns to the earth. The cycle of his life is like the cycle of the sun. That is why when conquering cultures forcibly removed the Indian from his origin, the anguish and disorientation he felt was devastating. The cruelty was even greater than we supposed. On the quiet streets of La Junta, where these homes now sit, hundreds of brilliantly colored teepees once stood. This small eastern Colorado town is where the Santa Fe Trail turns south. With the wagon tracks of the white man already embedded along its banks, thousands of Indians met at this place on the Arkansas River for one last time of fasting, ceremony, and gift-giving among themselves. It was the place where the last great peace council between the Plains Indian tribes was held in 1840. It was a great reunion, and it was farewell. The ground held all these tribes upon its arid plateau, and the river curved to embrace them for one last time before their departure. Today, citizens of La Junta live within this great bowl of nature. They feel the wind, dread the winter, and delight in the arrival of spring. In their awareness of the natural world in which they live, they begin to share with the Indian an understanding of the ground. In their relationship to the land, the difference between the white man and the Indian is that the white man wishes to be dominant upon the landscape. The Indian is but one of the many living creatures within a universe of living things. The white man is moved by nature, as is the Indian, but when the wind blows through a forest, the Indian does not hear its sound. He hears the voice of a spirit which speaks to him. Now, finally, we've become conscientious in our efforts to preserve those very things which the Indian fought to save not so very long ago. We've learned from the wisdom of an older people the value of the earth, the sacredness of the ground.